excellent introduction to the current state of play in Croatia. Are there any questions from the floor?
Actually, not a question, but a couple of brief comments, if I may. I'm Dag Johansson from the European Commission DG Competition. So a couple of comments from the lawmaker's perspective. And because we are in the ICN, in the ECN, and within the DG Competition, we are always thinking about designing a better anti-cartel regime. And there are a number of balancing acts that come into play, and I think that we can spend a whole day debating these things. First is the balancing act between criminal sanctions and leniency. I mean, me personally, if you have cartelists and they're ringleaders, you can throw them into jail and throw away the keys, but that's not the issue. But if you have this very great threat of long prison sentences, this will have a negative, or could have a negative impact of leniency, because they may be less likely to come forward. A second issue has also been touched upon here is the level of fines, which is self-evident. If fines are too low, the leniency program won't work. Because the companies are a profit and loss, they make a profit loss analysis and they say, okay, how much do we make if we go on? How much do we risk losing if we get a fine? If the fine is too low, they go on. If you set the fine too high, you can also have negative impacts because the deterrent will be so great that you might actually go on because you want to postpone the possible payment. Also, I mean, then we have the debate of if fines are so high, we risk actually driving companies into bankruptcy or insolvency. That could be an issue. But there is a bit of crying wolf there. If a company that is hit with a high fine, they usually come to us and they complain, oh, we can't pay, but it's very dramatic for us, and so on. But there we also have to be fair and look at that critically, but fairly. Third issue, one of the things that with cartel enforcement is the name and shame issue. That at least in the beginning of the regime, I mean, it should have and hopefully have an impact of a cartel company to be known as a cheater, especially if it's a company directly dealing with consumers. I've got a feeling that this name and shame effect has decreased a bit as dawn raids have become more and more frequent. When I've been team leaders in many dawn raids up in the Scandinavian countries. In the beginning, there were TV crews and coming there. It was a huge press coverage, and now there's nothing basically. So that effect is gone. Fourth comment, you mentioned escalation, which is quite fine. From a lawmaker's, which is quite correct, what you said about the risk of escalation. From a lawmaker's or the prosecutor's perspective, we know that, of course, cartels are, and any economist would say that to you, are inherently unstable. So we want them to escalate, and they want the whole house of cards to break down. So that also is part of the policy. But I would like to say thank you to Mark and the others, because this gave me, as sitting or acting on the other side of the fence, a good insight how you think, because during these inspections, the lawyers and the company, they go into a conference room and they sit there and they look very, very serious. But now I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Dag. And of course, perhaps just one brief remark, if I may, on the sort of level of fines. I think another thing, they shouldn't be too low, they can't be too high. That's fair enough. I think you also need to take into account the overall context in which this operates. And I've seen sort of many people come to me saying, look, why are fines in non-criminal competition matters so high if even in criminal white-collar crime matters they aren't? You know, you have major accountancy scandals. Ahold is one that comes to mind, you know, where people were really defrauded and significant damage was done, and, you know, the company ends up paying 50,000 euros fine. how can you then sort of turn around and say, for this cartel, we'll give you 200 million? I think you also need to take that from a lawmaker's point of view into account to achieve something that's credible, understood by the business community as well. Excellent. Any other points? One brief one before we rejoin to coffee. Two brief ones. Who goes first?
Yeah. Thank you, Mark. Just one comment prompted from the lawmaker's perspective, which you gave us, and as when it comes to fine. Now, I think it's a strange discussion to say, is a fine too high or too low? It should be adequate and it should be proportionate to what has actually happened. And I believe, and that is something which is, I believe, a bit out of balance. I mean, Mark has raised it in his issues. Now, if there was a cartel and it was harmful to the economy, it was harmful to businesses and consumers, then actually the way to deter cartelists from doing so in the future is providing effective private enforcement. And I find, and that is a strange thing. I think in one of these novels about Indians and palefaces, you always say paleface is speaking with twisted tongue. Because on the one hand, you always have the Commissioner Almunia saying, oh, everyone who had a damage is free to pursue private enforcement. And when we as a company write to the GD Comp, we apply for access to the files. Do you know what GD Comp writes back to us? Which is a bit, unbalanced if you put that in relation to public announcements of the Commission. And I believe that is really something we should all work together on. I mean, both lawmakers, companies, and council. Yeah. So, thank you.
I think that's a very good point. And in fact, it's exactly this dilemma. How do you reconcile sort of leniency and keep a leniency system attractive and private enforcement? How do you reconcile those conflicting interests, perhaps? One of the big challenges ahead for the whole legal community to look into. And I think it's being done. The Commission actually has public consultation going on, and it'll be interesting to see what the results of that will be. Okay. Final point? Question? Question. Please do.